Breakups can be brutal. They shake you, break you, and force you to confront parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. But have you ever noticed how some people seem to pull away instead of dealing with the pain head on? These are the avoidants, the ones who build walls instead of bridges, the ones who convince themselves they're better off alone. But here's the truth. Avoidants go through their own cycle of pain, whether they admit it or not. And today, I'm going to walk you through the 4 stages an avoidant goes through after a breakup. If this sounds like you or someone you know, pay attention, because understanding these stages is the first step toward breaking free. The first stage an avoidant goes through after a breakup is what I call the great escape. This is where they do exactly what their attachment style tells them to do. Run, detach, and suppress. Right after the breakup, an avoidant doesn't react the way most people do. There are no emotional breakdowns, no tearful calls, and no desperate attempts to rekindle the relationship. Instead, there's a cool, almost robotic indifference. They might even act as if they're relieved, telling themselves things like, "It's for the best. I don't need anyone. I'm better off alone." They convince themselves that the breakup was nothing more than a logical decision rather than an emotional event. Instead of sitting with their feelings, they immediately shift into distraction mode. They dive into work, hit the gym harder, binge watch shows, or throw themselves into hobbies they might not even care about. Social media becomes a tool not to express emotions, but to project an image. They post pictures of themselves thriving just to send a message, even if they don't admit it to themselves. They might even jump into casual dating, not because they're ready, but because they believe keeping things light and unemotional is the best way to avoid the pain. But here's the truth. None of this is healing. It's avoidance in its purest form. The avoidant believes that as long as they don't feel the breakup, it hasn't truly affected them. They view emotions as a weakness, something to be controlled rather than processed. And so they suppress every ounce of pain, pushing it further and further down, telling themselves they're stronger than their emotions. Yet what they fail to realize is that suppression is not the same as healing. The more they push their feelings away, the more power those emotions gain. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. It might stay down for a while, but eventually it's going to explode back up with even greater force. This stage can last for weeks, even months, depending on how deeply ingrained their avoidant tendencies are. Some avoidants convince themselves they've moved on completely, while in reality, they've only postponed the inevitable emotional backlash. Because no matter how fast they run, no matter how many distractions they pile up, the truth remains, you cannot escape what you refuse to face. After the initial phase of running and distracting themselves, the avoidant steps into what feels like a height, the intoxicating rush of independence. At this stage, they convince themselves they made the right choice. They feel lighter, unburdened, as if they've been freed from emotional entanglement. The world seems open, full of endless possibilities, and for the first time in a while, they feel completely in control. They start filling their time with activities that reinforce this illusion of freedom. Maybe they suddenly develop an interest in travel, throwing themselves into spontaneous road trips or planning solo adventures. Maybe they start hitting the gym even harder, not just to stay fit, but as a statement, "Look at me, I'm thriving." They might take on new projects, stay late at work, or pick up hobbies that have nothing to do with their genuine passions, but everything to do with keeping their mind occupied. Socially, they may become more active, reaching out to old friends they had unintentionally drifted from during the relationship. Nights out, casual gatherings, and carefree conversations become their new norm. They may even explore dating again, but not with the intention of forming deep connections. Instead, they keep it surface level, avoiding anything that feels too intimate. If they do engage in romantic encounters, they make sure to keep emotional distance, convincing themselves that relationships should be easy, fun, and without drama. Internally, they create a narrative that supports their newfound independence. They tell themselves relationships slow them down, that they function better alone. They recall moments from the past relationship where they felt suffocated, using those memories as evidence that they made the right decision. They romanticize the idea of being self-sufficient, reinforcing the belief that love is overrated and emotional dependence is a weakness. But beneath all of this, something unsettling begins to creep in. The distractions start to lose their effect. The late nights and constant movement no longer provide the same rush. The silence in between activities becomes deafening. They might find themselves scrolling through their phone, wondering whether to reach out, but quickly dismissing the thought. Even when surrounded by people, an unshakable emptiness starts to form. The illusion of freedom they built so meticulously begins to show cracks, but they refuse to acknowledge it. Because to do so would mean admitting that they do feel something, and for an avoidant, that realization is terrifying. At first, the avoidant believes they have successfully moved on. They have convinced themselves that they are free, unbothered, and better off alone. But then, without warning, the emotional backlash begins. It doesn't come as a sudden breakdown. It creeps in slowly, subtly, in ways they don't expect. A familiar song plays on the radio, and for a split second, they are back in a moment they thought they had buried. A random scent, a passing comment, a place they once visited together, all of it starts triggering emotions they swore they wouldn't feel. At first, they shake it off, telling themselves it's just nostalgia, nothing more. But as time passes, the thoughts become harder to ignore. They find themselves replaying old conversations, analyzing what went wrong, wondering if things could have been different. The moments they dismissed as insignificant suddenly feel more meaningful. Regret starts to creep in, not necessarily for the breakup itself, but for the way they handled it. They may begin to question whether they pushed the other person away too soon, whether their need for distance blinded them to what they truly wanted. This internal struggle is frustrating for them. Avoidants take pride in being unaffected and maintaining control over their emotions. But now emotions they work so hard to suppress are surfacing against their will. The distractions that once worked so well no longer provide the same escape. They can no longer drown out the silence, because in that silence, their true feelings begin to emerge. Restlessness takes over. They might start experiencing disrupted sleep, losing focus at work, or feeling irritable for no apparent reason. They might even pull away from the very people they leaned on during the initial stages, because deep down, they know they are running out of ways to avoid the truth. Some avoidants respond by diving even deeper into distractions, overworking themselves, seeking temporary excitement, or even numbing the feelings with substances. Others withdraw completely, isolating themselves to avoid dealing with the weight of their emotions. This phase is the turning point. Some avoidants will acknowledge what they are feeling and begin to process it, but many will refuse to face it, fearing the vulnerability that comes with it. They convince themselves that these feelings are temporary, that they will fade with time. What they don't realize is that avoidance only prolongs the pain. The more they resist, the stronger the emotions become. And sooner or later, they will have to confront what they've been running from all along. At this stage, the avoidance stands at a crossroads. They have spent weeks or even months convincing themselves they were fine, bearing emotions and distracting themselves, but now the reality is undeniable. Something is missing. The illusion of freedom no longer satisfies them the way it once did. The emotional backlash they tried to suppress has forced them into an uncomfortable place, one where they have to make a choice. Confront their emotions and grow, or repeat the cycle in their next relationship. For some, this is where self-awareness begins to break through. They start to recognize their patterns, the way they withdraw when things get too close, the way they downplay their feelings, and how their fear of vulnerability has controlled their relationships. They might begin reflecting on their past, realizing that this isn't the first time they've run from connection. Slowly, they allow themselves to sit with their emotions rather than escape them. They begin to question the walls they've built and whether those walls have truly protected them or simply kept them isolated. If they take this path, growth happens. They start to understand that independence doesn't have to mean emotional detachment. They realize that avoiding pain also means avoiding real intimacy. Some may seek therapy, journal their thoughts, or have honest conversations with trusted friends. They may even reach out to their ex not to rekindle the relationship, but to take responsibility for their part in it. These are the avoidants who break free from the cycle, who learn to open up, trust, and embrace connection without feeling like it threatens their sense of self. But many avoidants will take the other path, the one they've walked before. Instead of growing, they convince themselves that the relationship was never right to begin with. They rationalize the breakup, blaming incompatibility, timing, or circumstances. They reassure themselves that they simply haven't met the right person yet, someone who will understand their need for space without demanding too much. They numb the lingering emotions by jumping into another surface-level connection, mistaking novelty for healing. They repeat the same behaviors, finding comfort in their emotional distance, believing that love is more trouble than it's worth. This is the cycle of the avoidant running, escaping, feeling nothing, then everything, only to start over again. And unless they make the choice to break free, they will continue to experience the same heartbreak, not from others, but from the walls they refuse to tear down. At this point, the avoidant is faced with a moment of truth. They've gone through the cycle, the initial detachment, the high of independence, the emotional backlash, and the realization that they can no longer ignore what they feel. Now comes the real test. Will they take responsibility for their emotional patterns, or will they continue to run from themselves? This is where they are forced to look in the mirror and ask the hard questions. Am I truly happy, or just comfortable in my avoidant? Do I push people away because I don't need them or because I'm afraid of needing them? These are the kinds of realizations that can be unsettling for an avoidant because they challenge the very identity they've built. The one that says they are strong, independent, and better off without emotional dependence on anyone. But the truth is, no one is immune to love, loss, and connection. The need for belonging isn't a sign of weakness. It's part of being human. For those who choose growth, this is the moment when everything shifts. They begin to see that avoidance hasn't been serving them. It's been limiting them. They realize that real strength isn't in shutting people out, but in allowing themselves to be vulnerable. They take small but meaningful steps toward change. Opening up in conversations, acknowledging their fears instead of suppressing them, and understanding that connection doesn't have to mean losing themselves. They recognize that healing isn't about finding another distraction or another person to fill the void. It's about learning to be present with their emotions and working through them. But for those who refuse to confront their emotions, the cycle repeats. They tell themselves they just need more time, that the right person will come along who won't make them feel pressured. They might dive into another relationship, making the same mistakes, withdrawing at the first sign of deep emotional connection. They continue to convince themselves that relationships always end this way, that love always feels suffocating, that they are just wired differently. They don't realize that the problem isn't love, it's the walls they've built around themselves to keep it out. The reality is, avoidance doesn't protect people from pain, it prolongs it. True healing, true freedom, comes not from running, but from facing what's inside. And until an avoidant decides to stop escaping and start healing, they will always find themselves in the same place, wondering why love never seems to last. The journey of an avoidant after a breakup is not as emotionless as it appears on the surface. From the moment they walk away, they convince themselves they are fine, masking their pain with distractions and a false sense of control. They run from their emotions, believing that if they don't acknowledge them, they don't exist. But emotions don't just disappear. They linger beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise. No matter how much an avoidant suppresses, the reality is that heartbreak doesn't just vanish. It transforms into something deeper, something that will eventually demand to be faced. At first, they embrace the illusion of freedom. They tell themselves they are better off alone, that relationships only hold them back, that emotional dependence is a weakness. They immerse themselves in activities, surround themselves with people, and distract themselves with work, travel, or casual flings. For a while, it feels like they've escaped. But what they fail to realize is that running from pain doesn't heal it. It only delays it. They mistake avoidance for strength, independence for emotional stability, and in doing so, they set themselves up for the inevitable crash that follows. When the emotional backlash arrives, it hits hard. The walls they built so carefully begin to crack, and the emotions they worked so hard to suppress begin to resurface. Late-night thoughts become louder, regrets creep in, and they start questioning whether they truly wanted to let go. They begin to see their patterns, the way they push people away, the way they shut down when things get too close, the way they avoid vulnerability at all costs. This is the moment where real change becomes possible, but only if they have the courage to face it. At this critical point, the avoidant has a choice: grow or repeat the cycle. They can continue running, convincing themselves they are fine, or they can take the difficult but necessary path of self-awareness and healing. Growth means accepting that emotional connection is not a threat, that true strength lies in vulnerability, and that love is not something to fear, but something to embrace. It requires them to sit with their discomfort, to reflect on their past, and to consciously make different choices in the future. It's not an easy journey, but it's the only way to break free from the patterns that keep them stuck. The reality is, avoidance is not freedom, it's a cage. It keeps them from experiencing the very thing they crave at their core: deep, meaningful connection. Healing doesn't come from suppressing emotions. It comes from acknowledging them, understanding them, and working through them. The avoidant who chooses growth will eventually find that love doesn't take away their independence, it enhances it. But those who continue to run will find themselves trapped in the same cycle, facing the same heartbreak, never truly moving forward. The question is, which path will they choose? Thank you all for taking the time to engage with this message. Breakups can be challenging, especially for those with an avoidant attachment style, but understanding these stages is the first step toward growth and healing. The choice to face emotions rather than suppress them is what truly leads to freedom, self-awareness, and meaningful connections. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful insights on self-growth, relationships, and mindset transformation. Your support fuels this journey, and together we can break past limitations and build a stronger, more connected future. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced these stages? How did you navigate them? Your story might help someone else on their journey. Let's keep the conversation going. Once again, thank you for being part of this movement. Stay strong, stay aware, and remember, growth begins when you face what you fear the most. Until next time, take care and keep moving forward.